The story began when a group of subway tunnel diggers accidentally discovered an interconnected mountain cemetery under the City of London, which was so extensive, the cemetery complex was also partially submerged under the Thames River. The incident also became a national news headline, and everyone began to realize that the City of London actually stood on the graveyard of the tomb, strongly suspected, as the burial place of the Knights Templar who had previously invaded Egypt before they returned to England. When the officers were inspecting the tomb, suddenly came a group of people claiming to be government agents telling them to get out of the way. And strangely, the train line that previously crossed the area was relocated because the discovery of the tomb. We are shown allusions to the past featuring a future heir to the Egyptian monarchy named Princess Amenet practicing in front of her father. She is the only child of the pharaoh and will be the successor to his monarchy. Amenet was considered a god by her people, but suddenly, things changed when the pharaoh's wife gave birth to a son, which meant that the birth of the son would erode Amenet's position as the sole heir to the Egyptian kingdom. Amenet, who had been overcome by ambition, performed a ritual covenant with the god of death known as Seth. While the ritual was in progress, a black figure appeared to give Amenet a dagger with a red agate in the hilt. As soon as she held the dagger, Amenet's body showed the script of death on the surface of her skin. Now Amenet was reborn as an accomplice of the god of death. With that dagger, Amenet killed Pharaoh, his wife, and the newborn baby. Then Amenet continued her task to resurrect the god of death through the medium of the body of a chosen man. But just before the ritual was completed, Amenet was shot with anesthetic by the royal priests. Because of her barbaric actions, Amenet was buried alive. Her body was taken out of Egypt and her existence was blotted out of history. Back in the present, we will focus on two American soldiers who moonlight as sellers and thieves of antiques. They are spying on a village in eastern Mesopotamia. The two men are Nick and his partner Vale. Armed with a treasure map that he stole earlier, Nick invites Vale to enter the village. Vale refused because he thought it was too dangerous, and if it became known to their superiors it could be even more dangerous. But Nick assured him that the treasures stored in the area must be very valuable and could make them suddenly rich. But very far from what they imagined, things went beyond the plan. After successfully sneaking into the village, they were pursued by dozens of heavily armed rebels. Now their only options were surrender or death. Vale, who panicked, immediately contacted the American Army headquarters for help. Moments later, air support arrived, pounding the area with bombs. The rebels immediately fled in panic. The explosion left a large hole in the road. An instant later, a landslide caused Nick and Vale to fall. The explosion triggered a landslide that led to an ancient cave that had been hidden deep underground. Because of the discovery, their superiors and a dozen army personnel came there. Their superiors scolded Nick and Vale for acting rashly. It turned out that their superiors knew that Nick and Vale's side profession was fond of stealing artifacts and treasures for them to sell on the black market. In the midst of the incident suddenly came a woman named Jenny. Without further ado, she immediately slapped Nick. She was angry because Nick stole a map from her, and it was the map that guided Nick to find this place. Jenny is an archaeologist who is involved in the discovery of ancient buildings in the Middle East. Jenny was surprised to see the cave revealed by the explosion. She immediately understood that the cave was an ancient Egyptian tomb. But the question is, why the tomb of the ancient Egyptians can exist in the Mesopotamia region, which is thousands of kilometers away from Egypt. Their boss wants Nick and Vale to be responsible for this incident. He wants them to escort Jenny into the cave to examine its contents. Arriving in the cave, Jenny found droplets of mercury flowing into a place. At this point, Jenny felt that something was wrong, because mercury in the ancient Egyptian civilization was believed to be able to weaken the power of the devil. After they blamed the lights and went deeper into the cave hallway, sure enough, there was a pool full of mercury liquid. While Jenny was busy checking, Nick and Vale instead took advantage of the opportunity to loot the treasures there. Nick then saw a sinker connected through a rope to something unknown in the pond. He suspected that the rope was related to a treasure. Out of curiosity, Nick broke the rope. As a result, the sinker fell and pulled out a sarcophagus with a terrible shape from inside the pool. At the same time, suddenly hundreds of spiders appeared around them. The spiders bit Vale. Reflexively, he shot a bunch of spiders. When Vale calmed down again, Nick, who was looking at the sarcophagus, suddenly got a strange vision. He saw a beautiful woman in the middle of the desert walking towards him. The woman was Amenet. She said that Nick was the chosen one. She said that Nick was the chosen one. A moment later, Jenny wakes Nick up. They called for a helicopter to remove the sarcophagus. They loaded the sarcophagus onto a cargo plane to be taken to a research center in London. In the distance, Nick saw a sandstorm approaching. The troops loaded the sarcophagus onto the plane. They took off immediately to avoid the sandstorm. Inside the plane, Vale, who had been stung by a spider, suddenly died slowly and no one noticed. There Nick was seen justifying his actions that had stolen the map from Jenny. Because thanks to his actions they managed to find a historical legacy. But Jenny did not forgive him so easily. At the end, Vale suddenly got up and tried to cut the rope on the sarcophagus. Not only that, Vale also stabbed the commander who tried to stop his actions. The incident made everyone panic as Vale tried to stab Nick. Nick was forced to shoot him. Vale fell and it seemed that this time he was really dead. The strangeness continued with the arrival of thousands of crows that crashed into the plane. The incident damaged the plane's engine and the plane began to fall. Inside the plane, Nick put a parachute on Jenny's body. But Nick himself did not have a parachute. As a result, he also fell with the plane that almost crashed into a monastery. The next day at the London hospital, officers asked Jenny to identify the bodies of the victims. Because she was the only passenger who survived the plane crash. In the morgue, Nick revived. Somehow miraculously, he came back from the dead. Suddenly, the figure of Vale appeared, startling Nick. Moments later, Jenny and two officers came in to check. They were astonished to see Nick still alive. Vale also suddenly disappeared. On the other hand, not far from the monastery where the plane crash incident occurred, two members of the search team were seen examining the debris left over from the plane wing fragments. Then one of them saw a sarcophagus. Out of curiosity, he opened it. Suddenly the mummy in it rose up and kissed him. One of the remaining members of the search team then examined his friend. It turned out that his friend's body had shrunk beyond recognition. In the midst of his confusion, suddenly a mummy figure appeared who kissed him. His body dried up and shrank and was sucked in by the Amunet mummy. By sucking the souls of others, Amunet's body slowly looks whole again. Amunet then resurrected the two victims she had just sucked out their souls. They moved as if they understood what Amunet wanted. Inside a bar, Jenny is curious how Nick survived the plane crash. Nick, who knows nothing, is also confused to find the answer. There Jenny says that she works with a group of archaeologists who have long been looking for the tomb of an ancient Egyptian princess, whose history has been erased from history. At the same time, they are also eyeing a dagger with a blood gem on the handle. The dagger is believed to be able to bring Set, the god of death, into the mortal world. And according to history, the blood gem on the dagger was taken out and hidden by the Knights Templar who once invaded Egypt. And coincidentally, recently an ancient tomb complex has been discovered under the city of London. Jenny believes that the sarcophagus they brought on the plane contains Amunet's body, which has been hidden far outside Egypt. In the middle of the conversation, Nick kept seeing Vale's figure trying to talk to him. Nick then left to go to the toilet. At first Nick thought that he was hallucinating because only he realized the existence of Vale's figure. But Vale convinced Nick that he was real. He said that in that cave he had been cursed and Nick was also cursed. There is only one way to end their curse, namely by following all of Amunet's wishes. And the only reason Nick survived the plane crash was because he had a role in the big events that Amunet had planned. Nick, who was unable to digest everything Vale said, left the bar. There, he saw a creature with thousands of rats trying to eat him. A moment later, Nick was in the middle of the road. Luckily, he was immediately awakened by Jenny and it turned out that it was just his imagination. Nick, who panicked, then told what Vale had said earlier. But Jenny was confused and did not believe what Nick said. Then Nick got another vision and felt that someone was pulling him to a place. He also took Jenny to the crash site to find the sarcophagus. But when he got there, which made Jenny confused, Nick invited her to enter the monastery, not to where the plane wreckage was scattered. He saw another visual flash. When he realized, he was already in the monastery. Suddenly something attacked him. He was held by 4 Amunet soldiers. Then Amunet's mummy, who was already half human, jumped on him. Amunet said that she would use Nick's body as a medium to resurrect Set, the god of death. Amunet took a dagger from the statue. When she was about to stab Nick, she suddenly stopped when she saw that the blood gem on the handle of the dagger was gone. At the same time, Jenny entered and was stunned by the incident. Nick told Jenny to run away from there. But the angry Amunet immediately chased her. When Nick had managed to escape from Amunet's army, he stabbed Amunet, who almost sucked Jenny's soul. They ran out and used the car to escape from there. But in fact, they only drove around the forest and ended up back at the monastery. Not desperate, Nick stepped on the gas again to get away from there. But this time Amanet's army attacked them and made the car they were using crash. They were lucky to have survived. But without realizing it, Amanet was already there. Nick ventured to attack Amanet, but it was in vain. Amanet hit Nick until he was thrown like a ping-pong ball. Moments later, a dozen troops appeared who attacked Amanet and drugged her with mercury. When Nick asked who they were, one of them drugged Nick into unconsciousness. When Nick woke up, they were leading him to a room. There were various unnatural things such as a vampire skull preserved in a glass tube. The people then left Nick. Shortly after, a man appeared in front of Nick. The man was named Dr. Henry Jekyll. He was a criminal pathologist, an expert on nerves, a lawyer and also a scientist. The point is he is a genius freak. There, Jekyll told Nick that he had an unnatural disease. As he talked, his body shook. The veins on his face also looked blackened. Jekyll then injected the medicine in his hand. Within seconds, his strange symptoms began to disappear. Jekyll told him that he had been trying to find a medicine that could cure his illness permanently. Jekyll then took Nick to another room. In that place, Amanet was seen chained and injected mercury into her body. This was able to reduce Amanet's strength. There is also Jenny there. It turns out that Jenny has been a subordinate of Dr. Jekyll all along. Dr. Jekyll welcomed Nick to Prodigium, an institution that anticipates and studies things beyond reason that cause disasters like Amanet. He says that Amanet is the oldest discovery he has ever seen. Amanet's mummy has been hidden for 5,000 years and erased from history. He says that Nick was cursed and his body was chosen as the medium to resurrect Set, the god of death. Jekyll then says that he can cure Nick. Amanet interjects that no one can change destiny. The curse is unbreakable. Amanet says that she will make Nick immortal. When that happens, Nick will become a god. The world will follow his desires. Nick will be able to bring the dead back to life. The two of them will form a new world. Amanet then cried out in pain as Dr. Jekyll doubled the dose of mercury into her body. Then Nick and Jenny sat together while staring at Amanet's body. Jenny apologized for not being honest with Nick from the beginning. She never imagined that Nick would become like this. She said Nick was a good person who was willing to sacrifice his life by giving the only parachute on the plane to Jenny. Nick also replied that at that time he assumed that there were 2 parachutes. Then came Dr. Jekyll inviting Nick to talk in his office. There Nick asked Dr. Jekyll to immediately remove his curse. But unexpectedly, Dr. Jekyll refused and told Nick to accept his destiny. For the good of many people, he asked Nick to sacrifice so that later after receiving the curse his body could be studied and dissected by scientists. Nick was angry at Dr. Jekyll's statement. Elsewhere, Dr. Jekyll's men found a bloodstone that had disappeared from the hilt of a dagger. Amanet was able to sense the presence of that blood gem. She summoned a small spider and sent it into the ear of one of the officers. Inside the office, you can see Dr. Jekyll's body shaking. He tries to reach for the medicine that is near him, but Nick grabs the medicine. It appears that Dr. Jekyll is starting to lose control. He ordered everyone there to run. But Nick was too late. He got locked in the room with Dr. Jekyll. Jenny, who has come out, tries to find another way to save Nick. It seems that now Dr. Jekyll has changed himself completely and has been controlled by a demon named Hyde. He has extraordinary powers. Like multiple personalities, Hyde is different from Dr. Jekyll. He instead invites Nick to cooperate. He told Nick to accept his curse, that way together they would become kings of the world. While they were busy wrestling, elsewhere Amanet managed to influence the officer to release the chain. When Nick was cornered, he managed to grab the medicine and thrust it into Hyde's chest. This made Hyde in pain and he turned back into Dr. Jekyll. Jenny then came to Nick. She invited Nick to find the blood gem and destroy it. Because without the gem, the ritual will not be able to be performed. When Nick ran away, Amanet, who saw him, was immediately angry and released herself. Amanet then summoned a sandstorm to slow down Nick, who ran away from her. Outside, it seems that everyone is panicking because of the sandstorm that appeared unnaturally. In the office, Dr. Jekyll's men warned their colleagues to close all access to the underground tomb. Because sooner or later, Amanet, who managed to escape, will definitely come to get that blood gem. Nick and Jenny try to escape from a violent sandstorm. In the middle of trying to protect Jenny, Nick sees Vale, who tells him where the blood gem is hidden. Nick then follows him. Vale directed Nick to a tunnel that leads to an underground tomb. But unbeknownst to them, Amanet had arrived there first. She resurrected all the buried night skeletons to become her army. Elsewhere, Nick saw the arrival of Amanet's army running towards him. He immediately ran to save Jenny. Inside the tomb, the knight's body was seen rising up to attack the guards who were trapped there. After the guards had been successfully paralyzed, they opened the tomb door to welcome Amenet. There, Amenet found the blood gem and attached it to the hilt of the dagger. Elsewhere, Nick and Jenny were attacked by Amenet's army until they fell into a culvert filled with water. There suddenly Amenet appeared and dragged Jenny into the water. Nick tried to catch up, but he couldn't find Jenny. He returned to the surface for a breath of air and dived again to find Jenny. There he saw Jenny already silent out of oxygen. While avoiding the pursuit of Amenet's troops, Nick pulled Jenny's body and brought her to the surface. There Amenet's troops captured him instead. He was dragged before Amenet. At that place, he saw Jenny already pale and lifeless. All of Amenet's troops kneeled down and broke into dust. Nick, who was sad, then attacked Amenet. But it was only in vain. Amenet told him to give up accepting fate. But Nick returned to looking at Jenny's body. There, Amenet began to lose patience and threw him. Then Amenet broke Nick's leg. Amenet continued to tell Nick to give up. But Nick only irritated her more. And without realizing it, Nick had stolen her dagger. Then Nick slammed the dagger until the blood gem cracked. Seeing Nick's action, Amenet immediately said that if Nick broke the gem, then he would die. He would lose the opportunity to control the living and the dead. At that moment, Nick looked at Jenny's body. For a moment, Nick was silent. Then he thrust the dagger into his own body. Instantly Nick trembled. His corneas were split in two. He had turned into Set, the god of death. Nick walked towards Amenet and dropped her dagger. When Nick saw Jenny's body, he came back to realize. He remembered Dr. Jekyll's words if he had to sacrifice for the greater good. But Amenet distracted Nick. Nick remembers Jenny's words again. If Nick is a good person and is willing to sacrifice for others. Nick attacks Amenet. He sucked out Amenet's soul until there was nothing left. Amenet's body dried into a mummy. Limping, Nick walked towards Jenny's body. In the midst of his loss, he cried and apologized to Jenny's body. At the height of his grief, he screamed Jenny's name to come back from the dead. And miraculously, Jenny came back to life. He looked around and found that the dagger had been used. Jenny then saw Nick from a distance. When Jenny was about to approach him, Nick shouted for Jenny to keep her distance from him. Nick said that he was no longer human. He didn't want to hurt Jenny. When Dr. Jekyll arrived at the place, Nick suddenly disappeared. Inside the headquarters, Dr. Jekyll seals Amenet's mummy with mercury. Dr. Jekyll wonders if maybe Nick, who has become the god of death, will ally with him to fight the impending danger. Meanwhile, deep in the desert, Nick revives his best friend Vale and invites him to explore the Middle East to find answers to what happened to him. And the movie ends. So what do you think about this movie? If you like it, please click like and leave a comment for this video. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a video from Allo Recaps. See you next video.